Welcome to the All Podcast. This is Josh, a licensed therapist.
And this is LaShawna Moyle, a licensed social worker operating as a therapist. So we're going to discuss stigma.
Yes.
And I'm going to open with a definition of stigma.
Right.
And
huge word.
It's a huge word. So it's a mark of disgrace, right? So that's really heavy and ugly. And so I think we throw around the term stigma quite often, actually. And so a mark of disgrace is a huge way to define that because there is that negative connotation automatically ascribed to it.
And it's kind of in your face and just applied right to you almost in a sense.
Yeah. When you say stigma, yeah, people jump out and that's a bad thing, right? So there's just that negative thing that is directly attached to it.
Right. And there's a lot of talk about fighting stigma and breaking the stigmas down and making it easier to access and giving opportunities and things like that. And it's all attached to this giant umbrella term stigma. And really, it's a big producer of shame and guilt. It's saying, I don't want to do that thing because of the stigma attached to it, because of the negative marks of disgrace, as you said, attached to it. And really, it's driven by assumptions, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that, Josh. So especially when we think about, the stigma in mental health and therapy, because we talked about that, like what is therapy? And, there's a huge stigma attached to that, right? And
there is.
And it's attached to assumptions about what that is, what that looks like. What does that mean, right? What does that say about me? Or, those assumptions that we have that others have about those things.
Right. It's the questioning, is it real? Is it really real? And then that almost societal piece of it drives our internal dialogue to say, maybe it's not real. Maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way. And that's not our authentic self.
Right. And in sessions, and I'm not going to speak for you, Josh, but for me, with individuals, that is what they are questioning daily when I meet with them is, what is wrong with me? Is something wrong with me? Should I be feeling this way? So many times in a session, people will say, well, I don't know. Well, maybe. Or so what they authentically feel about themselves that's coming up, they question because of what somebody else has said or what maybe they've perceived somebody is thinking about them. So that assumption piece and that stigma is huge.
Right. When working in the field of addiction for many years, I worked with many clients who had this idea in their head that addiction was a moral failing and that maybe I'm not an addict, or to be an addict, you have to be, living under a bridge with a brown bag and a paper, a bottle, and, I can't make it to the next go around without my next fix, right? And so that stigma drove people away from getting help, right, to justify, and it also drove people to not admit when they needed those helpings, right? Because that's a lot, right? Just to unpack right there.
That is a lot. And I've shared, my own experience in saying that I'm a Nar-Anon member, right? So I have contact with individuals who are the addict, if you will, right? And the stigma is part of the reason even the family members, the loved ones, the friends of those suffering from addiction don't want to share or are afraid of it, right? Because even those that love those individuals, there's a stigma attached there, right? All these assumptions of what you should do, what you shouldn't do. All those pieces also come. And addiction, has this huge stigma attached to it. Like you said about the addict, what they should look like or where they live or how that looks, right? And the truth is addiction touches everybody, regardless of race and ethnicity and finances and education and all that stuff.
Profession and yes. And we want to reduce it to this thing, right? This easy thing to understand. And I think that's the complexity of mental health is there's so many different kinds of ways, maybe even anxiety manifests itself and depression manifests itself. And when you are struggling, and you very may well be, and I have as well, you tend to resort to those images or those shoulds or those, maybe I shouldn't be feeling anxiety, or maybe I should just get over it, or maybe I should listen to what the unwritten messages in society are telling me to do. And then I don't get help. And then I'm in constant conflict inside with my authentic self.
Absolutely. And I think should and shouldn't also is attached to, should I get help? Shouldn't I get help? Is there a certain level or a certain extreme at which I should know to get help? Or there are people that need help more than me, so maybe I shouldn't be going in to ask somebody about what I'm experiencing, right? So those also come into play again, and assumptions, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's all constructed. We know where it's constructed from, the larger society and individuals who we surround ourselves with and things of that nature. So those are all pieces of the complexity, but at the core of it, it is when we're having those should versus shouldn't battles within ourselves. That's the indicator. That's
Absolutely.
the indicator. Ask for help. Talk to someone else, right?
Absolutely. And I think, again, you and I, we work in mental health. That's what we do, right? And we are gracious enough to currently be in a position where we are having these conversations about mental health much more often, not just with the individuals we work one-on-one with, but even in larger spaces, right? But we still see that stigma. We still see the uncomfortability when the topic comes up, right? People may turn around, they may start to fidget, right? So there's still that, all that stuff going on, even though we are having these conversations and we are the face, if you will, currently within our spaces of the resource that is attached to mental health here. We're still seeing that, and we are still very much aware of the stigma.
Yeah, and we know we see that because we hear questions like, is it wrong for me to feel this way? Or is it wrong for me to think about something like this? Or is it wrong for that? Or I feel like this feeling I'm having is so intense that I shouldn't be having it. And that's the stigma. That's the stigma. That's applying a mark of disgrace to ourselves.
Absolutely.
And saying, I'm disgraceful, so I don't deserve help. And we know that's not true.
And last week we talked about vulnerability. So there's a stigma attached to that too, right? Being vulnerable, right? And what that means, right? That means that I'm weak right? And so, stigma, I think, reaches across, like you said, many, many areas within our lives all the time. It's something that we are battling, if you will.
Yeah, and vulnerability is the foundation through which we break down stigma. I mean, that's how we fuel through it. That's how we say, I'm going to ask for help. Maybe I'm going to ask, am I supposed to be feeling this, right? Because those are good questions to ask, but it just tells us that the stigma is alive, but we want you to ask.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing to do, right? And that's where I think empowerment comes in, right? It takes a lot of empowerment to reach out, but also stigma takes away and it disempowers as well, right? Because it can keep us sick. It can keep us not okay. It can keep us burdened by everything that we're feeling because someone somewhere told us, or something somewhere told us that it's not okay to feel that. So because we want to not appear a certain way and mention that we've failed, we don't want to ask for help.
Right. And I have spoken about, well, maybe I haven't yet, but that I battle with being anxious, right? And so the stigma attached to anxiety, right? It's disempowering. And so, again, I just spoke about in moments when in this space, right, we address groups of people. And it's something that I get incredibly anxious about, right?
Yeah.
And so initially I feel very disempowered in the sense that, yes, I feel anxiety and prepping for that. And man, I don't want to do this. What if I fail? What if I sound like an idiot? What if, all that stuff happens? And then generally the opposite happens when I'm in that space, right? And if I share that about myself, it becomes even more empowering because I think the individuals in the room are like, oh my gosh, this person, she's saying that she gets it and, she understands it, right? So I think, again, keeping that internally and questioning, like you said, that internal battle with myself, but then actually opening it up to others. So taking it from a disempowering space to kind of more of an empowering space in terms of sharing that.
Right. And most people that I've worked with, when they've shared their most vulnerable selves, they begin to stand a little taller. They have sort of those building blocks of being aligned with who they are, right? Even if it's a flaw, even if it's something that's deemed as weak, or even if it's something that someone else is telling you shouldn't be feeling, they say, I feel empowered because I can sit with that piece of me and know that someone can validate me with that piece of me, right? Because I have a tremendous amount of anxiety too. I walked into a presentation today just feeling nervous, and I had presented to a group of nursing students, and I've presented to nursing students quite a few times, but I'm feeling nervous, and of course I walk into the room, and the thing that's on the screen is bowel movements. They're talking about bowel movements. I'm like, uh-oh, am I going to be able to like stay on task and stay focused to talk about depression and anxiety?
Is there stigma attached to bowel movements?
I think so. I think so. But, I've never been able to end a presentation by saying happy bowel movements, learning. But I did that this time. But when you're sharing that, like, automatically I said, I'm distracted. There's this bowel movement thing on the screen, and there was some body parts on, fake body parts on a table that they were examining and studying and things like that too. I said, I'm distracted, guys. And so I went to my outline. I kind of regrouped myself and just went from there, right? And then you build on that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I generally open with saying, I'm sweating, right? Because I'm here to talk about anxiety and depression, and hey, I'm sweating, right? My anxiety is physically manifesting itself, right? Yeah, so just seeing how that can grab attention, yes, get you on focus, see who you can engage in the room, but just that piece about sharing, right? Admitting that, being vulnerable in that moment. So
Yeah, and much of this podcast involves a lot of sweating and being uncomfortable too, because it's brand new for both LaShawna and I, and we try to be vulnerable on air and to make sure we're being real and being authentic, and really our mission is to provide some sort of help within each of these episodes for someone out there.
Yeah, and stigma is a huge part of that. And I'm going to take from the American Psychiatric Association, because more than half of the people with mental illness don't receive help for their disorders.
Wow.
More than half.
I was blown away by that stat.
Yeah. It's pretty big. And so that's why we're here, right? We're trying to break some of that down, if you will. And part of that is us being vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely. Because stigma is the pathway. Public stigma is those bigger items of stigma that those assumptions are placed on roles. And then we take those and we turn them internal to our internal dialogue, to I'm not good enough and things of that nature. So I think, with that being said, it's oftentimes a pathway to guilt and shame. But our way out of that, like we talked about, is to to be vulnerable, stand on that, and continue to stand a little taller each day. So how do we use stigma and basically break down those barriers? I'm jumping ahead of myself in the outline here a little bit, but how do we break down stigma?
Well, I think we just have to start talking about it. We have to acknowledge that it's there. And, everyone defines normal differently, but that it's normal, whatever that means, right? Because it might mean something different for you than it does for me. However, whatever that is, we should be talking about it.
Right.
Otherwise, like you said, we're just internalizing it and we don't know, right? Like you said, there's this public stigma. So that can mean anything from what's expected from you in your job, within your church or your religion, right? Any of these other roles, if you will, that we play, and what that looks from the bigger side, and then how we take that in and how it manifests in us. But we've got to talk about that, right? Because chances are likely, like you and I are saying, people understand that. They've been there too.
Yeah.
And so opening that up really can change the dynamic.
Right. Having, lived with anxiety and depression for a number of years and knowing the kind of roller coaster ride it can put us on a lot of times, I think it does help to talk about it. It does help, from my perspective, to educate people on it as well in those presentations that I was talking about, and LaShawna does them as well. And it helps to understand that about each other as coworkers, I think, right?
It does.
When we know what's going on in each other's life, and sometimes we question if we overshare our personal lives with each other, but a lot of times it helps us hold each other up stronger and support each other better, I think.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So thank you, Josh. You're fantastic there. But yes, it has helped both of us, I believe, grow, right, in the sense of our professions. And I think just as human beings, when we're in those conversations with individuals, right, we're human beings in those moments. The other thing I think, the other way that we help to break down stigma, of course, is to be conscious of what we're saying, like the language we use, right? So we
Yeah.
got to give it a name too.
For sure.
So we know what
Yeah.
that is. We
Yeah.
know what negative connotation is attached to that, or how to reframe that in a way that others can understand it, right? Because we're professionals and we use terms sometimes that others don't understand. And
Right.
so helping others or using that language, right? And using empowering language versus the disempowering language as well is also a huge part of that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And validation, right? Understanding or seeking to use empathy when our communication is a pathway to do that. You know, if someone in your life is struggling, just listen and actively listen, you know, respond back what you're hearing and asking them if they're okay, and if you can help them, ask for help, or, you know, something like that. Those are helpful things to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, that I think that's key is because often, again, people expect, especially with therapists, that we're going to tell them what to do. But you're right. Just listening, just lending that space, right?
Yeah.
Just giving them someone a space to be who they are. Good, bad, ugly, right?
Yes.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Very powerful, very powerful. And I know I've been in many sessions where you sit and you listen and you empathize and, you know, you ask your open-ended questions, and some of the rawest, authentic selves display themselves, and that's where the work begins. And it's so beautiful to watch that, because I think that's the moment harmony starts within someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Talking themselves right through it. It's like, there it is. And you said it, right?
Right.
It came out of your mouth, out of your being, right?
Yeah.
And yes, all we were doing was sitting there and kind of supporting that, fostering that, who they really are in that space.
Right. And then, you know, we offer tools. Of course, every
Yes.
therapy session should maybe have homework, I think, attached to it. But
Absolutely. My favorite part.
right, right. And sometimes that's why we make a good team too, is that we have to remind each other to do the same homework for ourselves too. Because
Absolutely.
sometimes as helpers, we can not help ourselves as well as we should, right?
Yes.
And that's why we have goals too. That's why we talk about the goals every podcast as well. But let's talk about well-being and how the stigma takes away from taking care of ourselves. And what I mean by that is that I can, you know, early on in the season, we talked about my experience with burnout. But I can tell you that the stigmas pushed me there, right? The first things to go were my well-being and taking care of myself, because why should I care about me? I have to care about other people, right? And that's a helper's sort of stigma, but there's lots of stigmas out there that can cause us to forget to take care of ourselves, forget to advocate for ourselves, because we easily deprioritize ourselves. So how do we emphasize ourselves without it being labeled as selfish, right? Because that's immediately where we go, and we're like, so I can take this and this off my plate and this off my plate and this off my plate, but I'm going to add more of work to my plate. I'm going to add more of this to my plate. I'm going to add more of this to my plate. And meanwhile, our inside selves are screaming for help because we're not well. So what have you done with those instances when you've discovered them, LaShawna?
This is great because, yeah, there's a stigma to that whole self-centeredness, if you will, right? And it's not self-centered to take care of ourselves.
No.
It's healthy.
It
It's
is.
necessary because, as you just
In
described,
fact, yes.
Otherwise, yeah, we're burned out. We are not performing at the level that the individuals we're working with need us to, right? And so I think the way that I take care of it, again, I've kind of talked about walking, right? And so for me, again, that's the first thing that I let go too. That's the first thing that I let go out of my schedule is my walk, right?
Right.
But that is the best thing for me mentally, physically. And so what I do is I just make sure, even if it's only 30 minutes, right? That's not what I like to do. I like to do more. But if I can only get 20 minutes in, right? I'm doing it. So I just try very, very hard to make sure that I put it in part of my day wherever I can fit it in. It doesn't always happen, but I really do try to make that a priority. And so I guess what I'm saying is I schedule it in, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to create, I think one of the most helpful things is create routines that work for you.
Yes.
That build those things in naturally.
Yeah.
So then it becomes something that we're not thinking of, because when we're thinking of it, it seems easier to put off or to take off our plate and say it's not as important today because of A, B, and C excuse, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So make yourself a priority. Do it today, right? We say just
right
do
now.
it right
Yes.
now. Stop it and just do it, right? If only therapy were that easy. Just stop it. I think there's actually a YouTube video out there where this guy is like, I'm going to $1 a minute, but I'm going to solve your problems in 2 minutes, and it's going to cost you $2 or something like that. And the lady's like, what's the remedy? And then the next guy comes in and he's like, what's the remedy? And he says, stop it. Well, sadly, it's not as easy as just stop it, right?
Right.
It takes a lot of practice and dedication and
yeah, it took
trial
us
and
a
error.
while to get to where we were, right, in that space.
Right.
It was a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of negative whatever's going on. So we can't just, you can't just stop it, right?
Right.
It's going to take more of that reinforcement of the positive things, of the authentic self, and all of those things as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think my commitment to breaking down the stigma is to keep talking about it, to keep asking questions, to keep presenting to groups of students if I'm able to, and to just keep talking about it and putting it out front, right? Because that public stigma, that's harder to change.
Absolutely.
Our response to it is probably the pathway where we start individually, in that I'm going to be vulnerable and ask for help, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think even you and I, right, we are role models in that sense where we aren't perfect, even though neither one of us wants to admit that, but
What?
we're not. But even you and I have said, you know what, we probably should ask for help individually in separate situations, right, depending on what that is. So even,
For sure.
So even for us to say, you know what, that's part of the stigma, right?
Right.
And we're going to go ask for help. We're going to go to this person and ask, or we're going to say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Right.
And we've done that with each other as well. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, that helps. All right. You ready to talk about our goals? How we did?
Sure.
Yeah. So I kind of had, I was on fire. Like I was 5 days a week. And that was my goal. 5 days a week. I was packing my salad for lunch, and a healthy choice for lunch. And I was making my eggs and peppers and usually spinach or some sort of broccoli slaw with it that was healthy with my yogurt and all those kind of things. I was doing awesome.
You were. I saw it.
And then last week I had a little slip up, and boy, it started the trend rock and roll into the weekend, right? It was like, oops, I messed up, so let's really mess up, right? Right? And I think that's where, sometimes we just need to fail really fast, like, oops, I slipped and now I need to get back to it. And realized that this morning as well. So I'm back on the wagon. I don't know if you want to call it back that way, but I'm back to packing lunches, and hopefully I stay strong in that area.
Good for you.
Yeah. With exercise, it's going to be an eternal struggle for me. I did get the 3 times in, but I think it was, again, really, it was LaShawna and her dedication to walking that helped me there, because that's the only reason I would have got it done.
Well, hey, whatever works, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Building
and that's where
blocks.
I think building it into your routine is such a healthy thing to do.
It's helped, but it doesn't always work.
Right.
So for me, my goals, we'll start with reading. I got in 1 chapter this week.
Nice.
1 chapter. And I know I talked about a time frame. I said I wanted to have, I think, was it 8 books?
It was
by
something like,
June? Maybe
was it
10?
A book every 2 weeks, I think, maybe,
Something
or
like
something.
that. So
Yeah.
I'm falling behind there. But
Yeah.
I did. I read a chapter, and what I find more exciting about the goal is it's actually, I am enjoying this book. So the material is engaging.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even though I didn't maybe get as much of it done as I wanted to, I did do it, and it was good information.
Yeah. What's the book on? What's the book about?
It is actually about addiction and
neat.
Societal, right? All these
Right.
pieces, all of these various pieces, and stigma and the moral failings and all the things you kind of mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And about just societal pieces, how that plays a role, how we internalize it, right? How it manifests itself. And to now we have this huge issue, right? With all this stigma attached.
Right.
And it's got a lot of good information in it, and it's I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I find addiction a fascinating subject to study, and I've done it for a numerous amount of years, but it has a lot of complexities attached to it. It does. And it's not a moral failing. And I think maybe some of the things we do under the influence, or some of the things that could be deemed as maybe not okay to do, right? There are things that happen like that. But, if we applied those same principles to, bad leadership, or to not showing up to work on time, or to, not being a healthy husband or a healthy wife or a healthy spouse or a healthy partner, we'd have a lot of moral failings all around, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just sticking to one thing, right?
Yeah.
I think we all could say that some piece of our life we've had this quote unquote moral failing that we're learning from and we're improving, and that's exactly what people who find recovery are doing. They're learning and improving, and sometimes they've made the most profound changes, and they are the most profound people I've worked with. So
awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic, Josh. Yeah. Thank you. My other goal, of course, is to assert myself.
Yes.
And, I don't know how well I'm doing in that arena for this week either. I did again wear an outfit this week that I felt was assertive, in the sense, again, that it was professional. And I did second guess the outfit. In fact, I battled with the idea of the outfit because here I go back into this authentic self. And when we first started sharing, I described my outfit, and I even talked about my shoes, right? And how they were not maybe as dressy as the outfit at that time required. That was my biggest battle with yesterday's outfit, was that I was going to put dress shoes with it. And I thought, well, I want to be myself, and I don't want to wear the dress shoes. But with the assumption and all those things that went with the event and things for the day, I felt it was most appropriate to wear the dress shoes. And I did. And it was an assertive and empowering outfit overall. And so in that sense, I did assert myself.
Yeah, and she, if I may say, ran the event like a boss.
Well, thanks, Josh. Thank
I
you
sat
very
back
much.
and enjoyed and did my part of helping, but she did a wonderful job.
Thanks.
And I also remember a conversation we had this week where we were bantering back and forth about how to be assertive in certain situations. And, we talked about the power of suggestion. And LaShawna did that this week. She suggested like a self-assessment type of thing, or an evaluation process, actually. And we put it out there. She put it out there. And I think that was an assertive thing that sort of made her uncomfortable, and it's making her uncomfortable that I'm talking about it right now.
Indeed. But yes, again, and yes, that's why, you and I work well together. Like you said, we do. We empower each other. We have those supports for each other. So the same as we do for our clients, we do for each other. And thank you.
And I think it's important
that
for you too to find that. If you've found someone that you can do that with, amazing, right? It doesn't
Absolutely.
have to be 12 people that can do that with you. It can be just one quality person that does it with you.
Yes.
But you need that support system.
Yeah, absolutely. Join us next week as we discuss conflict. This is LaShawna.
And this is Josh.
Stay authentic, well, and empowered.